Taxes are an unfortunate reality for most people living in the modern world. We pay them every year, we complain about them, and then we try to forget about them until next year. Yet taxes are also one of the most important elements of any economy around the world. Societies can grow from effective taxation and crumble without it. Taxes are what funds our roads, schools, and parks, our military, emergency services, and social welfare, and everything in between. These services are structural elements of modern society. We wouldn't have these without taxes, and without them, we would have chaos. So, do we need taxes? Well, not necessarily. They serve an important purpose, but there are other systems that could theoretically achieve the same thing. Any alternatives that exist to one of the most important factors in our economies are worth exploring, even if some of them are a bit out there. Before we start, it is important to truly understand what it is that taxes achieve and why we have to pay them. The cost of society or modern-day subscription taxation is the method by which a government generates revenue to support its expenditures. If a government does not raise enough taxes to fund these expenditures, it does what anybody else would do, take on debt to temporarily live above its means. This is the oversimplified cycle of government fiscal policy in our modern economies, and it should make sense to everybody. If we stop paying taxes, the government is forced to either quit giving for the services that keep society running, or to incur ever-increasing debt until it is forced to declare bankruptcy. So this is why taxes are levied. Simple enough. But there is more nuance to this argument. Certain economic schools of thought, not to mention political ideologies, advocate for lowering taxes and spending less money. Their opponents will argue that increasing taxes and spending more money is the way to go. Both of these sides will argue that their way is the right way to deliver the most overall prosperity to an economy. But they can't both be right. Right? Well, in a sense they can, so remember this for later. In either case, taxes will still exist. So now it is important to ask, why do people pay their taxes? Some people have made the argument that taxes are like paying a subscription to modern society. But let's be honest, it's not out of some civic duty to keep their nation going, or even because they think they will benefit from government programs. I mean, come on, let's be honest, the real reason is that, if you don't pay your taxes, you go to prison. As far as motivation goes, this is about as much as most people need. Now on to the alternatives. The logical question, what about tax-free nations? The United Arab Emirates, Monaco, Brunei, these are all examples of national economies that operate without the need for income taxes. In fact, there were no federal income taxes in the United States prior to 1913. So this gives us an easy answer to the question of, do we need taxes? To which these countries would answer a resounding no. But this all comes with two big problems. The first is that these countries do have taxes, they just don't have income taxes. When we explored the economy of Monaco, which is a nation famous for being a tax haven, we found that a majority of the government's revenue still came from taxation. In the case of Monaco, this was a value-added tax, or a sales tax. This is suitable for tourism countries since it generates government revenue from visitors rather than income taxes, which require individuals to work in the country. Alternative taxes are a common feature for a lot of countries and they have a lot of advantages. Take Singapore for example, it still has income taxes, but they are incredibly low. What it does instead is levy taxes on things that require government expenditure. Cars are the best example here. Roads, and highways, and traffic lights, and bridges and tunnels are all funded by taxes, apart from a few private toll roads. These are expensive, and not everybody gets the same use out of them. Someone who works from home and walks everywhere in a normal country is still going to pay for roads through their income taxes, even if they never use them. They would not, however, be required to do so in Singapore. Income taxes are minimal, but the government generates the cash it requires by taxing the living crap out of those who own vehicles. Depending on the car, buying and registering a vehicle in Singapore can easily cost 5 times as much as it does in the United States. This gives the Singaporean government the revenue it needs to pay for these public goods. If you don't need or want to drive a car, no worries, you don't need to pay. In many ways, this is an extremely equitable system. What you pay for is what you get. Furthermore, it aids in the reduction of traffic congestion in the little nation because few people will drive due to the high cost of doing so. The system, however, is not without flaws. When a car costs as much as a house, many people are not going to be able to afford it. For some people, driving is just a necessity. They might be in an industry that requires driving, they might have disabilities that require easy transport, or they might live in remote areas without easy access to public transportation. The back and forth about this form of taxation is fascinating. However, Singapore still has taxes, so while it is fascinating, it is irrelevant. Instead, let's look at the second big problem. The other countries that get away without charging taxes have some alternative form of revenue. More often than not, it is natural resources. By substituting oil revenue for tax revenue, these countries can still provide all of the facilities that one would expect from a typical tax-paying country. Even places like Alaska do not need to charge state taxes. In fact, they go beyond this by disbursing a share of this oil revenue amongst the residents of the state. So you could call this negative taxes? Or something else? It depends on the flavor of politics. The problem here, of course, is that a country needs natural resources to substitute tax revenue with natural resource revenue. Another big problem with this kind of taxation. In theory, the natural resources of most countries belong to the people of the country. Taking away natural resources to sell is no different from taking away money. In both instances, a government is taking an asset away from the people to pay for public expenditures. Of course, people feel direct taxation a lot more than natural resource sell-offs, but it is still important to consider for the sake of our question here. So maybe the problem here is the assumption that governments need revenue at all, fueled by inflation. Why not just print money? You have probably asked this question as a kid. Why doesn't the government simply print money to cover all of its spending? If you continued to do this constantly, you would eventually introduce more and more money into the economy. Cash, like any other asset, has a value that is determined by supply and demand. The main problem with this is that we generally express an item's value as a nominal cash value. Outside of this, if you have more money being pumped into an economy, it will cause inflation. Although it will do it slowly. What a country like this would need is a way to drive up demand for this currency to ensure that it stays in line with this increase in supply. The easiest way for a government to ensure that there is a consistent demand for its currency is to force the citizens of the nation to deliver a portion of this currency back to them at the end of every year. As taxes. Maintaining that demand without taxation is the difficult part, and if not done properly, you will have hyperinflation. Now so far we have held on to the assumption that we actually need government expenditure. So what happens if we let go of this assumption? Anarcho-capitalism. All bets are off. Anarcho-capitalism is an economic theory that advocates for the complete elimination of government influence in an economy. In such a system, everything is privately owned. There are no public roads, schools, parks, or hospitals. There aren't even things like social welfare or emergency services. The concept behind such a system is that private enterprise would take the role of government-provided services, and the profit motivation would encourage these services to become more competitive, resulting in a higher net value for society. Sounds kind of great, right? Well, the first thing it does is eliminate taxes. If there are no governments to raise taxes. So, mission accomplished? Beyond this, it must be recognized that there are some legitimate advantages to such a system. An individual would only ever have to pay for something that they actually wanted or needed, and they could be relatively confident that they are getting a good price for their purchase, so long as there is competition. The concept of totally unrestricted capitalism generates some fascinating thought experiments. The first is that of disabilities. In a purely capitalistic society, someone who is born with or develops a disability is going to be less productive and less economically valuable as an individual. In extreme cases, they may not be able to make enough money to feed and clothe themselves, so they would just die. A huge assumptive leap here is that even the most hardcore free market economists would see this as a negative outcome. A private military may be employed to protect the assets of individuals in an area, but in doing so, they are also indirectly protecting the assets of everybody else in that area. Therefore, by the same logic, nobody would foot the bill to pay for it, and it would not be provided. In this type of society, people are driven by profits exclusively. Many profit-generating industries produce a lot of pollution. In a world with regulatory bodies, there is some level of control around this. We limit where factories or power stations can be set up and also control what kind of pollution they can leak out into the environment. If these regulatory bodies didn't exist, well then it would potentially be down to private militaries to regulate and enforce these types of externalities. Very quickly you arrive at an outcome where rich people just declare war on things to get their way, which is a real dicey reality to be living in. A solution to all of these problems is to set up communities that address the problems of these. It's hypothetically possible that a company could establish an area where people could live separated from negative externalities and be provided with things like schools. Residents of this city would have to pay a subscription, but they get the benefit of having a lot of this stuff sorted out by default. This is also a way to ensure that everybody is chipping in for a military which would keep this area secure, and in the event that someone didn't pay their subscription, they would also be responsible for forcibly removing them from the city. If you haven't realized by now, this company is basically just a government with taxes, with more steps. The truth is that most products and services are best delivered by corporations with a profit motive, the same way that there are products and services best delivered by governments simply looking to retain power. The exact place to draw this line between business and government services is the real debate, but it almost certainly does not lie at either extreme of the scale. Anyway, some final thoughts. Nobody loves paying taxes, and not only because it takes money out of your wallet, many people enjoy spending money. People dislike paying taxes because it takes money out of their wallets for something they would not have purchased otherwise. Tax dollars often don't directly improve the quality of life of the people paying them, but they do materially improve society. So long as it is agreed that there are items that would not be supplied by private businesses in a competitive market, and that those items are of value, we will need a collective organization to supply those goods. The most prominent collective organizations we have in the world are governments, and the best tool they have available to them to raise revenue is taxes. There are alternatives, but they have their limitations. Do we need as much tax as we do? Maybe not, but are there better taxes to levy in more intelligent ways? Almost surely. But do we really need taxes? Apart from the alternatives, they are the worst plausible alternative. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching our video. Be sure to check out more of your Alisif over here. And leave us any other doubt in the comments section. See you soon.